In this lecture, we're going to start saving the IDs of the enemies defeated. There's going to be a problem during this situation. The IDs are stored in a list. However, the player prefs class does not support lists. We're limited to strings, floats, and integers. So, how can we store a list of data? We're going to use an unconventional solution. The list will be converted into a string. For our scenario, storing a list as a string will be more than sufficient. However, this solution does not scale for complex lists. Since our list is a collection of strings, it shouldn't be hard to convert the list into a string. To get started, we're going to create a utility class for performing this process. After finishing the enemies, we're going to save the quest data for the player. The code is going to be similar to saving the enemy IDs. Converting a list to a string is going to be a common action we'll be performing. For reusability, creating a class for performing this process will make things easier. In Unity, navigate to the scripts/utility folder. Create a C# file called player prefs utility. Next, open this file with Visual Studio Code. Let's remove the first system namespace. The collections.generic namespace can remain in the file. We're dealing with lists. Therefore, this namespace can remain in our class. Next, let's empty the class, remove the monoBehavior class, and wrap the class with the rpg.utility namespace. This class is going to be completely static. The purpose of this class is to outsource the logic for converting a list into a string. Let's add the static keyword after the public keyword. Inside the class, we're going to define a method for converting the list. Define a public static method. The name of the method will be called setString. This method is going to need two pieces of information. Firstly, it's going to need the key to save the data. Not only will this method convert the list into a string, but it'll also handle saving data into the player's file system with the player prefs class. Add a string parameter called key. Secondly, it's going to need the list. Create a second parameter called value. The type will be the list class with the string type as the generic. This method will only be able to accept lists with strings. We're limiting support to a collection of strings. However, you're more than welcome to try updating this method to support multiple types by using generics. In our case, it won't be necessary. The next step is to begin the conversion. C# has a method for performing this process. First, we need to add the system namespace at the top of the file. This namespace contains a class with the method. Back in the setString method, create a string variable called formatted_value. Its value will be the following: string.join. The string.join method converts a list into a string. The concept of converting a collection of data into a single value is called joining. This method accepts two values. Firstly, it accepts a string to act as a separator. We can separate each value with a specific character. Let's pass in a comma. Each item in the list will be separated with a comma. Next, we must provide the list to join. Let's pass in the value parameter. The return value of this method will be a string. We can use this string to store it in the player's preferences. Call the playerprefs.setString method. The name of our key will be the key parameter. Next, pass in the formatted value variable. Before moving on, I'm going to log the formatted value variable with the debug.log method. This will help us verify that the correct value is being stored. Our method is ready. The next step is to call this method from the Game Manager component. Open this component. Scroll to the Save Defeated Enemies method. At the bottom of this method, we're going to call our utility method. Before we do, we must prepare a list of defeated enemies. At the moment, we don't have a list for this information. Replace the print method with a new variable called enemies defeated. Its type will be the list class with a string generic. Set the value to a new instance of the list class. Next, call the enemiesdefeated.add method to add the ID of the enemy. Lastly, let's call the playerPressUtility.setString method to start saving this list. As we know, this method was designed to accept two pieces of information. Firstly, we must provide the name of the key. Let's set the name to enemies defeated. Next, we must pass on the list. Pass in the enemies defeated variable. Time to test our game. If we did everything right, defeating an enemy should appear on our list. Switch over to Unity to play the game. I'm going to defeat an enemy. Next, I'll enter the portal. In the console, the enemy's ID has been logged. That's great. However, there is a problem with our solution. Let's talk about it in the next lecture.